I love Hellboy. I love Mike Mignola and his artwork. I love the Lovecraftian horror aspect that he uses and all the mythology and folklore. I love the animated and the live-action movies. The first live-action movie more than the second, but let's not get into that right now. And I'm really excited to see David Harbour as Hellboy, only for the entire film to turn into a tie-dad. Hell, I even have this big guy. So, without further ado, released in 1994, scripted by John Byrne with art by Mike Mignola, this is Hellboy: Seed of Destruction. And yes, the first Hellboy movie by Guillermo del Toro is heavily based on this story. The book opens up in 1944 in East Bromwich. An American squad of soldiers accompanied by the superhero Torch of Liberty, Professor Malcolm Frost, Trevor Broom, and Lady Cynthia Edna Jones, a medium, are there to stop a Nazi plan called Project Ragnarok. They're waiting around in this old church for the Nazis to show up, and then Lady Cynthia says that there is a second center. Cut to the very tiny Tarmagant Island off the Scottish coast. The Nazis watch as... Wait a minute. He has a fucking swastika monocle. He's really dedicated, man. Anyway, the Nazis watch as the one and only unkillable wizard himself, Gregory Rasputin, uses these big old gloves to summon the Ogdru Jihad. The Ogdru Jihad are these, like, eldritch horrors that are basically the great old ones from Cthulhu mythos. It kind of helps if you have read Lovecraft's work, but it's not really needed to enjoy the story. So anyway, back at the church, Lady Cynthia sees dead people, and they tell her something is coming. Then an explosion goes off in the middle of the church. Back on the island, the Nazi with the monocle, Klaus Warner von Krupp, is yelling at Rasputin about how nothing happened. But Rasputin says he has not failed. He has just set in motion events that cannot be stopped. And back at the church, a little red monkey-looking thing with a big hand is sitting in the fire. And then they all take a picture with him and name him Hellboy. Cut to the present of 1994. An elderly Broom is speaking with Hellboy about a mysterious expedition he had gone on. Something apparently happened to him and he was declared dead after missing for months. Then he suddenly reappeared in New York and his mind's all fucky, so he can't remember no good. But then, he's finally able to recap the expedition. He and 3 Cavendish brothers set out to the Arctic. After trekking through the snow, they finally found a massive temple of Yang Kor, something that the Cavendish family has been looking for 9 generations. They explore the temple and find a giant statue of an unknowable horror, with a very detailed human statue sitting in front of it. Trevor goes over to the statue and runs his hand over its face when the statue opens his eye. And then everything sort of goes yellow. Back in the present, Trevor's having a breakdown about how he can barely remember anything but screaming. And then seeing the New York skyline from aboard a ship. And then going directly to the building and calling Hellboy. And Hellboy's just like, shh, don't worry, I'm here for you. Just take your time. Then Hellboy looks out the window to see raining frogs. And then Broom freaks the fuck out and runs out of the room. But he's almost immediately thrown back in, covered in weird, like, suction cup marks. Yep, Trevor Broom, the guy who dies at 1 hour, 26 minutes, and 55 seconds of a 2 hour and 12-minute film, dies about 17 pages into the book. So Hellboy races into the hall with his handgun in hand, and he immediately realizes he's made a mistake by running into a very dark room. Then, he's attacked by a shadowy beast, and it bites his hand and wraps his tongue around Hellboy's forearm, and then Hellboy just lobs Froggy off of him, and it starts leaving those weird marks, and Froggy wraps its tongue around the stone right hand of doom, and Hellboy just swings him into a sarcophagus, and then Froggy, like, hops back up and races toward an open window in the bathroom, but Hellboy shoots him, and Froggy dissolves into just a skeleton and like a weird puddle. And later, Hellboy calls the director of the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, Dr. Manning, and tells him that Broom is dead, and to send some lab guys to the place. Cut to a mysterious Victorian manor. A shadowy figure tells an old woman that Broom is dead, And then she asks the figure will keep their promise. And the shadow says, very soon. Cut to the exterior of Cavendish Hall, a 150-year-old home that was built on a little island in a lake, and now the lake's gotten bigger and the place is nearly flooded. Also, there's a curse. So, Hellboy, Liz Sherman, and Professor Abe Sapien show up outside the door. Miss Cavendish brings them inside, and Hellboy begins questioning her about her son's expedition with Broom. But she says that after they left the base camp, they were never heard from again. Miss Cavendish gives the trio a little history lesson on the Cavendish family. Many generations ago, Elihu Cavendish came to America and built his cursed house and was preparing to go on his own expedition to the Arctic when he died. Then, generation after generation of Cavendish men set out, all meeting the same fate. And she says that the curse now ends with her 3 childless sons' deaths. Then the butler tells them that their rooms are ready, and the conversation ends for the night. Miss Cavendish is later sitting in the parlor when a voice comes from the shadows. It says, "You did very well. I'm quite sure they suspected nothing." Then Rasputin is seen in the shadows. Emma Cavendish asks if he will keep his promise, and he guarantees that her oldest sons will return to her. Elsewhere in the house, Liz is shown to her room, and we get some backstory for her. She has pyrotechnic abilities, and when she was 11, she lit an entire city block on fire, killing 32 people, including her parents and brother. But now she has her powers under control, and her last uncontrolled manifestation of them was 10 years prior. Then Hellboy and Abe are brought to their room. Hellboy is worried that Miss Cavendish really doesn't know anything, and that their journey was a waste of time. But then Abe asks if Hellboy recognized the butler, and Hellboy says that he did seem familiar. Abe then says that the butler looks remarkably like one of the men on the recent expedition, Sven Olafsen. Hellboy and Abe decide to take this mystery into their own hands, and then Abe removes his beard, glasses, and clothes to reveal he's a blue fish man. Then we get some backstory on Abe. He was discovered in a sealed-off chamber in a hospital by some plumbers, and he was named Abraham because the paper pinned to the tube Abe was in read Ichthyosapien, April 15th, 1865, which is the day Lincoln died. So Abe leaps out the window and dives into the lake. And then Hellboy calls up Liz and asks if she recognized the butler, and she's like, obviously I did. They didn't even disguise him. Do you think we should worry about that? Because, like, if they aren't disguising him, they must be pretty confident in themselves. Oh wait, hang on a second. There's like frogs in my room. Then Hellboy screams for her to get out, and he races down the hall and smashes through the door to find an empty room with only a cigarette and a few frogs. Then the butler appears behind Hellboy and asks if anything's wrong, and Hellboy demands to know where Miss Sherman is, and the butler's like, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't know what you mean." Then Hellboy grabs him and says that he better start talking. But then the butler turns into a frog monster. And Hellboy's like, "Oh fuck, not again!" and tosses the butler away and starts beating it with his stone hand. They fight, and Hellboy tosses Sven Frog over the railing and beats it to death with a big pot. Meanwhile, Abe is swimming around the base of the house and finds a way inside. And in there, he finds a large cavern filled with bones and a big statue. Back in the house, Hellboy finds Miss Cavendish and runs up to her, only to discover she's dead with the same suction cup marks as Broom. Then Rasputin emerges from the shadows and says that she died as she wanted to, in the embrace of her children. And Hellboy wonders why he recognizes that voice. And Rasputin's like, "Of course you know my voice. I am your master. I am the one who summoned you. Now, kneel before me, and you will live to see the new dawn of this world." Hellboy goes for his handgun, but the floor beneath him breaks open, and giant tentacles erupt from beneath it and grab Hellboy. Hellboy narrates that the tentacles are like the frog tongues, and his whole body is going numb. Rasputin tells Hellboy to not refuse his destiny, and Hellboy is pulled beneath the house into the darkness. Hellboy lands in a giant underground temple for the Agdru Jihad and finds Rasputin waiting for him. Rasputin tells Hellboy,
"You were meant to stand beside me at Ragnarok. To command the power I shall unleash upon this world. This is your purpose, your destiny."
And Hellboy's like, nah, I think I'll pass. And then he shoots Rasputin in the head. And Hellboy's like, that's the part where you fall down since I just shot you in the head? But Rasputin begins to glow yellow, and Hellboy is launched away. Rasputin orders Hellboy to never lay a hand on his master again. Then Rasputin continues and says,
"You are not the first to attempt to destroy me. 80 years ago in Russia, I was poisoned, shot, hurled into the frozen river. And it was then, as I floated down in those icy waters, that the serpent called to me. He showed me my purpose. It is my destiny to bring the fall of humankind."
Then Sven the frog monster attacks, and Rasputin reveals that he turned the 3 sons into these beasts. Cut to some dark, spooky place. Abe walks around and just finds more death. He rounds a corner and sees 2 frog monsters take the body of Miss Cavendish into the waters. And then he's like, I'm not going that way. Fuck that. And backs away. And then he finds a boarded off hall. And he very easily breaks through the, very wet wood and sees Elihu Cavendish. So Hellboy's still fighting Froggy, and he's starting to get pretty fatigued. Froggy grabs him by the hoof and just slams him against some walls and tosses him in the water, where he lies as Rasputin gives his backstory. Flashback time! After Rasputin was contacted by the Agdru Jihad, he went into isolation and studied and preached about the end of the world. Then along came the Nazis, specifically occult lover Heinrich Himmler. Himmler brought him to Germany, where he met a madman who Rasputin figured he could easily manipulate. Well, he was right, and he began to work with the Nazi scientists, and they created the Ragnarok engine. Then, after Hellboy's summoning and the Allies won the war, the Nazi scientists fled, leaving Rasputin alone. Fortunately for him, he heard their voices and was led to the Arctic, where he discovered that the voice was of Sadhu Hem, who was imprisoned on Earth. Then he just sort of sat there and meditated until he finally saw the Agdru Jihad floating in their cocoon-like prisons in an endless void, until he was awoken by Broom. Sadhu Hem turned the explorers, sans Broom, into frog creatures, and Rasputin messed with his mind and then sent him back to New York so that he would call Hellboy, which would lead Hellboy to Cavendish Manor. Also, he has Liz. Rasputin says that he has allowed Liz to use the full extent of her powers so that he can then harness it, and Hellboy's basically old news. Okay, now, I'm warning you. The next page, you're gonna have to look away, because Sadhu Hem is a being of unspeakable horror. To gaze upon Sadhu Hem to invite utter madness of mind-shattering proportions. You've been warned. Go to this timestamp to skip it. Okay. So Sadhu Hem is okay, it's sitting there. It's sitting there. What is that? So anyway, Rasputin is about to sacrifice Liz to funnel their powers into Sadhu Hem so it can release the Agdru Jihad. And he offers Hellboy one more chance to stand with him. Hellboy says, "Go to hell." Meanwhile, Abe is unconscious in front of Elihu Cavendish. And then Rasputin is channeling his and Liz's powers into Sadhu Hem, and then Sadhu Hem begins to use it to free the Agdru Jihad, as Hellboy's being eaten by Froggy. And a giant beam of light and energy and whatever explodes upwards out of the Cavendish house and into the sky. As Hellboy's being eaten, he pulls out an old concussion grenade and jams it into Sven's mouth and says he's sorry. And then Sven blows up. In the void, the Agdru Jihad are moving around and the cocoons are being broken. And from an observation shuttle, an alien reports to his alien captain that all 7 cocoons have movement, and the power is coming from a core world called Earth. So, back on Earth, Hellboy is trying to get up as Rasputin is like,
Yes, 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 I fucking did it. I brought the end.
then he's stabbed through the chest by a harpoon thrown by Elihu Cavendish, who is possessing Abe Sapien. Elihu wakes up Liz out of her trance, which causes Rasputin and Saduhem to ignite on fire. Then Abe leaps down and catches Liz as Saduhem screams. Abe lands with Liz and Hellboy runs over to him, and the three flee as Saduhem continues to be engorged in flames and the cavern around them crumbles. They find a big set of stairs and Hellboy tells them to go on.
He's not done here yet.
Then Rasputin leaps out of the flames and shoots fire or something out of his mouth at Hellboy. And Hellboy says,
I've had it with you. So what if you brought me here? I didn't ask to come. I don't owe you a damn thing.
And Rasputin's like,
Whoa, if you kill me, you'll never know who you are. And you'll never understand your true power.
you're right, but I can live with it. And clocks Rasputin, causing him to turn into a skeleton. And then Hellboy crushes his skull. The manor collapses in on itself as Elihu Cavendish's body sits in the middle of it. The next morning, Hellboy, Abe, and Liz are sitting in the ruins. Abe says he barely remembers anything. He found a statue of Elihu Cavendish, and the next thing he knows, there's a harpoon in some guy's back and a big monster. Hellboy concludes that Elihu Cavendish possessed Abe to get revenge on Rasputin. Hellboy asks if Liz is okay, and she says that she feels better than ever. Then they ask if Hellboy's okay, and he has a flash of Rasputin's charred body telling him he'll never know who he is. Cut to a castle in the snowy mountains. A Nazi castle! Which also houses a lab. And in said lab, a little Nazi light turns on, and three figures, frozen in ice, stand as it begins to crack. The end.
But it's a tie, Dad.